Hey, it's Beth. This work is for week 4 and crosses the kind of traditional silos of class lines a little bit. So this is both for my 6103's entrepreneurship and sustainability class, particularly for this week, the question that looked at which of the 5 social entrepreneurs described in Catherine O'Brien's book, activity 5.3, which starts on page 73, inspires you the most and why, and also connects to me for my 5131 course on digital citizenship, particularly the last topic that we looked at for this week, which looked at what is the package self. So this week was looking at issues of privacy, but it ended on this concept of a package self, or how we portray ourselves online or social media in our digital lives versus who we are as a whole, or in real life. So those two concepts kind of mishmash together for me, as well as the concept of kind of respectful research, which connected also to my 6115 course for this week. So I'll get into what I'd like to talk about. So first of all, looking at Catherine O'Brien's book, and those 5 social entrepreneurs. So a separate post where I talk about social entrepreneurship and the work for this week more generally, but looking at those 5 social entrepreneurs, I had heard of all of them before and had positive associations with all but one. So personally, I really like the Khan Academy and taking it global. I use both of those in my own teaching, and they're both very helpful, especially in a place where we don't have access to a lot of human resources or other resources. They both help provide support to me as a teacher and my kids living in a remote, isolated area. So I very much see the value of both of those things to help increase social justice and social entrepreneurship, with the idea that we're helping to address communities whose needs go unmet. The issue that I have, and the reason I want to talk about this, is I think this is a blind spot for most of kind of traditional academia and white people in the Western world generally. So what's my issue? In that book, it's the inclusion of the Me to We organization. And if you don't know anything about that organization, so it's in the textbook on page 75, Catherine O'Brien's book, but this was kind of respected in that they had a lot of clout and traction in Canada and the Western world generally organization that did social entrepreneurship work. I say that in bunny ears because in 2020 there was a big scandal with the We Foundation that runs the We charity, and that had to do with Trudeau's local government and contracts being awarded. And I don't want to talk about that at all. That's not the crux of my issue with the We charity. It's nothing to do with it. So it's not politically motivated for me at all with that. My issue is more about how that organization worked at all and its inclusion in something like our textbook by a leader in the academic field of sustainability. Now, if you don't know anything about the We charity, I'm going to link to a bunch of articles here, but the one that I want to point out the most is one by Dubinsky from 2020. That's on a platform called The Conversation, which is a place that is meant to take academic research and present it in a more journalistic way. So the writers of these articles are academic researchers. This is work that they're doing to try and present work that they do in their academic lives in a way that's more easily consumable by the general public, so edited by journalists so that it's got a different appeal to lay people, which is incredibly important to me and also connects to my 6115 work for this week in terms of arts-based education. So a key component of that is making learning accessible, and I would argue that's part of our digital my digital 5131 class as well, is that so many of these platforms make so many things more accessible, not just us, but also learning in different formats. So we need to use them in ways that we can take things like complicated research and make them usable. Anyway, that's just connection pieces for me. But in the Dubinsky article from 2020, she points out the issue that One, we're talking about social entrepreneurship, particularly in the context of people doing work for groups they're not a part of. So, what we might consider allyship work. That there are some very serious intersectionality issues and issues that need to be considered to make sure that work is done in an ethical fashion. So, in the Minsky article, she pulls out the difference between the ideas of reciprocity and white saviorism. And she uses a program that ran in Cuba right after the Revolutionary War in Cuba as an example of that, and says there's a difference between providing what a country has asked for in terms of skilled labor and technological advances. So, sending people like teachers and professors to help train the population of a place, and sending people for concepts like voluntourism, which is what the We Foundation was notorious for. And I understand that people could reasonably say, like, hey, Beth, you like back off the fact that this charity is included in this book. And I get that because it was, a certified charity that ran in Canada. It was obviously accepted by most people, including the Canadian government, as a reasonable charity. They've existed since the 1990s. But what I can say is that I remember very clearly watching Craig Kielburger on Oprah in 1999. I remember watching that episode and feeling like something was wrong about that situation. And I remember him talking about building wells and building schools at that time. And I just remember feeling like there was something voyeuristic in that. And I know we say white saviorism, and I'm talking about Oprah, but I think that's a good pointing out that there's intersectionalities there. So Oprah's not white, she's black, but she's rich, she's incredibly privileged. She grew up poor, but she grew up poor in a Western society. She didn't grow up poor in the same way that people do in some of these countries where charities like We do work, where there's no clean drinking water, and it's a different standard. So I think that brings up issues of two things. So one, the difference between genuine social entrepreneurship and the intersections of allyship, if you're working in communities outside of your own. But I think also connects to kind of deficit thinking, right? When I'm thinking about this in relation to my experience as from a research perspective and somebody who is part of communities that get research. So I'm autistic, and I'm dreaming up a creative piece to do to try and mash all of these ideas together, because there's a lot of really confusing stuff here for me. But I think the fact that this stuff is so accepted by people is problematic, and accepted by people in the academy. My teaching cohort is mostly white, mostly female. We're educated, mostly affluent, in that we have careers that are stable. So compared to the Canadian population, we would be wealthier now, regardless of the situation in which we grew up. But we're uncomfortably homogenous. And I think when that happens, you have blind spots like this can pop up. Anyway, the social enterprise that I would choose instead to focus on, and that will become part of what this work will be embedded in, is Kapatiak, which is the social enterprise branch of the Kitikmeot Heritage Society, which is an amazing organization where I live. So basically, they share a space with the high school. So I've had the benefit of watching Kitikmeot Heritage Society grow over the last 14 years I've lived in my community and worked at my school. And we'll link to some of what they do. But basically, they take the money from the social enterprise branch of the Heritage Society, which is Kapatiak, or Inuit owned coffee company, and they sell it, and then they take the proceeds for that to fund other kinds of programs. So to do more work that's outreach work, or outreach work, activism work, social service type work. So it's a really good blend of how you can take a culture or heritage or an education perspective of social entrepreneurship and marry it to economics, or kind of that version of entrepreneurship. So I choose to focus on that.